Welcome everybody to this latest in the series of ValuesJam guest sessions. And Tim, brilliant to have you here. So to start off with, why don't you just do a short introduction of yourself and also the great work that you do?
Sounds good, Alan. I've been crazy passionate about the topic of culture for about 30 years. Started as a young leader promoted, and culture kind of became my thing to unite a team of people that were much older than me and knew much more than me. But then I went on to be president of Denison Consulting, really focused in the culture space. I started cultureuniversity.com, and that connected me to you and lots of people around the world like Edgar Schein, who was a big mentor in many ways. And then on to Human Synergistics, another one in the culture space, learned a ton. And now I'm with Compass, a division of Insight Global, which is the second largest tech staffing firm in the US. And we focus on culture leadership and making connection the heart of culture.
Great. And you mentioned Edgar Schein. He passed recently, didn't he?
Yeah, very sad, but he went peacefully, and we had many calls, over his last year, and just as sharp as ever. And we really feel fortunate to have known him over the last 10 years and learned just an amazing amount from him.
Yeah, and it just recently I've been thinking about it. It sounds a bit morbid, but when we pass, and it will happen to us all, I think sometimes we kind of are too quick to regard that as the end. And I don't think it is. Just because you're not here anymore doesn't mean to say that you can't have an ongoing positive impact. And I think he's one of the people that absolutely, certainly will.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. I mean, still use his insights literally every day. So I think as they get out there over time and are helpful to others, his legacy will just grow.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into our values jam. So I've got the deck here. And what I'd like you to do is tell me how many times you would like me to cut the cards.
How about once?
Just once. Okay, so I've got two piles in front of me now. The left or the right, which would you prefer?
Left.
Okay. And here we've got 20 cards in the left pile. So number 1 to 20.
5.
5. Now, we were joking before we came on, weren't we, about which card it would be?
We were.
So how do you feel about this one?
Sure, that sounds great.
Right up your street. So what does innovation mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like, Tim?
Wow. So when I think about innovation, my mind immediately goes to adaptability. And again, going back to Ed, a lot of what I know he believed, what I believe is that, ultimately with cultures, we're looking to have a more adaptive culture that can adapt as the market changes or new leaders come in or we develop new things. So I always think about innovation in connection to adaptability. And is it really like a spark of innovation, a one-time thing, or are we really building an adaptable organization that can deal with the craziness, whether it's a pandemic or CEO change or a market disruption or whatever?
Yeah, and it's actually, for me, innovation is kind of is overblown, I think. People wow about innovation, but actually, like you've just said, it's more about how do you create an environment that is able to be innovative on an ongoing basis rather than this kind of one-hit flash in the pan thing. So how, if you were to think about that in terms of creating a conducive environment, what does that look like?
Well, so my belief goes back to connection and relationships being at the heart of that everybody already has lots of knowledge and ideas and potential, innovations in their mind that they don't bother to put out there because they don't want to look bad, or they don't know if it's a good idea. So I think in organizations, there's not enough time spent on really building relationships and connection between people so that they're more comfortable raising ideas in the first place. So look at that as the very starting point. Are you building connection and safety? But then we've got like a 4-step thing that's just the first step, right? Because what ideas are going to come out from an organization? Well, if we haven't educated and build skills and capabilities and like done that in a direction, then we won't make the most of having a connected organization and a lot of safety. And then if we don't have leaders who are encouraging the new and redirecting things that aren't so helpful, then it can stop there. And then like last is where a lot of people start, is like systems and processes to like scale innovations. So we kind of look at it backwards from that, of like the safety first, because the ideas are already out there. People just aren't raising them. Then there's got to be the education to steer that in a direction. There's got to be the leadership, and there's got to be the systems. And that's a long road for sustainable adaptability.
So what you've just described then is, when people think about innovation, I think most people tend to think of the bing idea, right? Whereas what you've described is this really designed / engineered environment so that the bing happens more often and then is put into place. And this is a bit weird, but I had a values jam this morning, and the example that I gave on that call, which was by way of explanation, it was about the value of independence. And I found myself describing a job role that I was in, where one of my responsibilities was to foster innovation in the organization. And I was asking George, who I was values jamming with, about how is it that at the beginning of whether it's innovation or independence, everybody gets really excited about it. But then you mentioned yourself just now, systems and processes, they have to be put in place. But what I found was that the two are often not compatible. And so when you put the systems and processes in, that becomes everybody's focus, and you lose the enthusiasm and the energy and the excitement. So do you want to talk to that in terms of innovation just for a bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think how I know I've gone at it, I haven't seen that as much, because again, the starting point was probably a different place than what you're talking about. So, right, when you have an organization where connection's at the heart of it, and there's a lot of shared vulnerability, people open up just personally, then as we talk about the work side, you can't help but talk about ideas and things, right? So just the fact that we're a connected organization, we value relationships, we spend time there, is sustainable. That's a different kind of system. But at the other extreme is, I like to think about innovation and connection to, there's this quote, like the future's out there, it's just not evenly distributed, or something along those lines. So a lot of times innovation comes at, well, where in our organization are we seeing, new ideas deliver results? Let's understand that. Let's decode excellence. Let's find out very relevant things that can be translated to others, versus a new system that everybody now is going to have to learn and apply. So helping organizations be able to define excellence, go at it, capture it, spread it, put systems around how that works. So it's not like a new idea that just like everyone has to implement, is like a much more sustainable system. So whether it's the relationship side, or it's a structure that builds out of learning and excellence, I think those are more sustainable systems.
Yeah, and I think
Then like an innovation jam, that we're going to have, every year or something. And like these other critical pieces aren't there, maybe.
Yeah. And so what we keep returning to is this recognition of our humanity rather than kind of, that false management of our human resources kind of approach. And the other thing that you mentioned was that the people in the organization have ideas. And this has just sparked a memory from how long ago? Probably 10 or 15 years ago. So I was visiting, I was a consultant for an investment bank, and visiting them in their New York office, who had the highest scores for their telephone answering. We used to measure a number of different things. And on my visit, I discovered that there was a smiley face on the top of the console where they answered the phone. And so I said, what's this doing here? How's this here then? And I was told, oh, I can't remember the lady's name, actually. It was so-and-so's idea. And what she says is that before we answer the phone, we look at that, and it reminds us that we need to be smiling inside and out. And that means, and I just thought, what a really simple, great idea. So I got introduced to the lady, and I said to her, would you mind if we did this in all of our key locations around the world? And she was like, what? My
My
and
smiley face.
pardon?
My smiley face.
Yeah, that's right. And we did it, and she was like walking on air. But it's so simple, isn't it? And what you're doing is just taking a bit of brilliance from one place and then spreading it. So the way I see it is that if you can maximize the return on your effort, that's got to make sense, right?
Yeah. And I mean, that's just one example of how it can work in organizations. To so often when organizations measure things and look at improvement, we'll go to the weak, the struggling, and all of the leadership time is there versus really learning and building on what others maybe have figured out, and why are they able to do it in the same structure and with the same measures and expectations as everyone else. What is different about what they've learned to do that others haven't?
Yeah. Okay, so just thinking about that metaphor part of the question, what does innovation look like, sound like, feel like to you?
I mean, to me, it's a combination of like excitement and energy about an aha moment, or I've discovered something. But so often it's again the other side of the spectrum, that it's wow, we've really worked and like figured something out. Like we did decode excellent. It was some work to figure out how they did it differently. It wasn't this big creative, brilliant aha moment. Yes, there's some of those. And I think on the connection side, as people interact, there's those inevitable ideas. But I'm a bit more drawn, maybe it's just my personality, to the other side of like figuring things out. And then I take a lot of satisfaction in learning what others have learned, because that's more translatable than that new thing, and figuring out how to understand if that is going to help people learn something new or innovate in some way.
Yeah. And it's similar for me, is that it's the energy thing. I think impact we've not mentioned. I think that comes through for me as well. It's like innovation is fine, but what's the impact? It's like you need it to have done something. And I think the other thing that what it sounds like is somebody saying, wow, how did you work? How do you think of that? Or how did you work that out? It's
Right.
this thing about how how did you get there when other people didn't? Whether it be a moment of brilliance or whether it be a painstaking working through a process. It's that kind of, not everybody could have done that. By definition, I guess, else it wouldn't have been an innovation, would it?
Yeah, I mean, I think if it sparks curiosity in others, and they're like engaging and wanting to understand more, then you might have something there.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on to another question, and let's look at the opposite side of the coin about which we're talking. So, where have you noticed a lack of innovation?
Oh my gosh. So I was in the automotive industry for 20 years. And again, very legacy driven organizations, a lot of history. I mean, very, very hard to innovate and do things new, and even a whole industry of automakers with like very demanding expectations. I don't want to hear anything different. Do it this way. I'm the boss. Like that kind of an environment is like a crusher for innovation, obviously.
Yeah, it's a good example, and it's weird because they tend to pride themselves on innovation from a product development point of view, but not.
And
Go
it
ahead.
was this was before Tesla, and in a time I think when we see this that innovation has been crushed or stamped out, that the market's ripe for disruption, or the industry's ripe for disruption. But I've heard it. I remember at an Ultimate Culture conference, we had someone from Zappos speaking and talking about Tony Hsieh and
Yeah.
how he had talked about how innovation had gone down substantially, and that was one of the reasons that he moved towards holacracy. So I think this, our leaders just pawn in it all, and almost like a victim to the industry or the lack of innovation, or that they see it and like really play into that as a huge opportunity because they know others will not be able to shift their organizations, maybe like they have a vision to.
Yeah, and the automotive sector, I have some experience of that. I did a project again about 10 years ago now, and so there's two stories I can remember. So one was that the marketing department had come up with the strap line that they used around the product, which was inspired performance. Great.
Sounds good.
Then, yeah, sounds good. So I went to some sales training to see what they were doing, and the trainer constantly referred to service excellence. So afterwards, I said to him, really interesting. I'm curious why you use that terminology and instead of inspired service.
Right.
And he said, well, why would we use that? So I said, well, your marketing guys refer to inspired performance. So I just thought, and he put his hand on my arm and said, Alan, the thing is, that's marketing. This is sales.
All
And it's
right.
all right, yeah, all right. And then the other one was, for people watching this, they might not know, but the guys in the showrooms that are selling these vehicles are not the employees of the company that make the vehicles, right?
Right.
So when I was starting the work, I said, how do you know how inspired the showroom salespeople are for your brand? And the answer was, we don't, but they're not our employees. So I then said, do you know of any organization that doesn't care about how inspired its sales force is? And
Right.
and then the light bulb went on, and we actually did an employee inspiration survey of the dealership employees, which was really enlightening. So to your point, I think that the automotive sector, we're just starting to see some disruption now, aren't we? With Tesla, and there's an agency model that's coming out. But yeah, it's just all of those different vested interests almost competing with each other instead of being aligned is just weird.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm involved in some things within Compass and Insight Global, where Insight Global staffing firm, right? So lots of contractors,
Yep.
tens of thousands that normally contractors would be kind of second-class citizens, not treated as well. So to just, having a vision of, well, if that's the norm and many organizations not treating contractors the same as their, current team members, and even maybe the standard for the current team members or FTEs is not the same as contract, like that's a huge opportunity. Oh my gosh, as people look to outsource and do things like that. So I think it's all over the place. But still, I would put connection and how we treat people way ahead of systems and processes to kind of spark those new innovations and ideas.
Yeah, and I totally agree with what you're saying there about outsourced people, because if you take, say, call centers, that's another classic area of being outsourced.
Exactly.
And yet these are the people that spend more time with the organization's customers than anybody else.
Right.
So, I use this phrase, which is outsourced but not out of mind, because in too many organizations, they do just that. They outsource it, and then it's like nothing to do with me anymore. Whereas the absolute reverse is often true, especially in that situation. So for innovation as well, in the ValuesJam card deck, there's the opportunity to create your own question. So
Okay.
let me invite you to ask your own question about innovation, starting with who, what, where, when, why, or how.
Oh, wow. That's one that I would prefer thinking about a minute, but
I can dive in if you prefer.
I'm a big how guy. So it would probably be something like, how do you foster or enable sustainable innovation or continuous innovation or something along those lines? Because I think a lot of people would struggle having a good answer for that.
And is that different to the steps that you outlined at the beginning of the conversation?
No, not at all, because those steps are all consistent with culture and
Yeah.
how cultures change and evolve. So we work with Ed to kind of build this framework called How Culture Changes. And what I was walking you through were kind of steps from how a old way of doing can become a new way of doing.
Yeah.
But there's more to that framework that Ed had said was there's 4 things that have to be there to say a culture has changed. There has to be new ways of doing that have to operate for a period of time. It's not just a one-time thing, right? People have to like it, maybe not initially, but they can't hate it, or there's got to be some way to see some desire there. Often because of the 4th thing, it has to get results.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm always looking at, well, what are the results we're going to be delivering? Are those sustainable and ever? Because way back in that sequence about safety and connection, we're pointing at that towards results for the organization. So that's why I'm all about kind of the how questions and, how leaders think about it or organizations think about innovating, but consistently to deliver results.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to this thing about sustained or consistent, doesn't it? Because again, innovation tends to be regarded as this one-off rather than it be a repeat. And you just touched there on results, and I'd like to ask you a question about that, I think, because you've reminded me again of another job. So I was running a conference center, and I wanted us to be viewed as innovative. And so in our objectives for the business, I wanted there to be something about delivering innovation. And my initial temptation was just to say, we want to create 6 innovations during the course of the year that create a positive impact or whatever it was. But I didn't do that because I just thought that puts huge pressure on them being a success. And we all know that everything doesn't always work, right? And if you're under pressure to deliver a success, then perhaps you're less ambitious than if that
Right.
pressure is reduced somewhat. So I don't know why I've remembered this so clearly, but I remember we put in 6 innovations to be put in place, not just
Right.
thought of, and for 4 of them minimum to have been a proven success. And so I'm interested in your thoughts around how you give people the latitude to fail.
Right. I mean, I think that only happens when they've seen it happen in their leaders. So it's like we're not going to like do some training and people are going to like learn that they can fail, right? They have to see there's failure, there's the follow through, there's re-engaging people and adjusting, and we're not reacting, angry and frustrated to no end. So what I always did is I went to a new manufacturing organization, and it was the product line had remained virtually unchanged in the prior 20, 25 years. So it was an axle company making axles. So we had targeted some products to redesign and started weekly meetings that I was part of, like regarding where we're at on that effort. And I mean, there were countless failures and things that didn't live up to expectations, but it wasn't like we just went back to the drawing board. And it wasn't like I was looking at engineering or manufacturing or R&D and pointing the finger. I mean, we went at it as a team with some safety there, and we're going to figure this out together. So I think when broader team members see like leaders collaborating in that way and not reacting in negative ways when things go bad, just trying to be persistently constructive and let's figure it out, you start to see that happen in others. And those people that experience that then with their teams start to replicate those ways of doing. But it's only going to spread if leaders have the commitment and shared understanding of why this is so critical that we figure this out. Because if we can't do it in our pocket, it's never going to spread and be in our organization.
Mm-hmm. And you're also making me think now about how sometimes I've been in organizations where there has been a focus on innovation, but actually it's been at the expense of some old stuff or some stuff that was already there not being fully utilized because it was less well regarded.
Right. Yeah, I think that's always out there. Like there's there's a whole scrap heap of ideas that most organizations have like moved on from that we could go back to or are already out there in use in some part. We haven't figured out how to scale or spread them.
Yeah. And that's the other thing as well about innovation, is that sometimes it's a function of context that determines whether it's regarded as a success or a failure.
Oh yeah.
And so,
Time.
you could 5 years later, that very idea might be just the right thing. It's not different in any way. It's just that the circumstances around it have changed. So have you come across that? You're nodding, so I'm guessing you have.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I'm struggling like grasping a very specific example right now, but I think very, very few new ideas are actually new, right? Someone's had that in a similar way or in different circumstances. So again, being able to mine those ideas in a more disciplined way can be powerful, but how you get groups to prioritize them and to be able to go at it more consistently, so it always doesn't feel like, well, how do we make an innovation like a reality here? Like the people know where ideas go and how they work in teams, and how if the team gets behind it, it can be a reality, right? If you can't see that line of sight, then like don't bother like trying to create safety and hoping ideas get out there. I mean, there's got to be a line of sight between someone sharing and where they see it taking hold potentially.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, have you ever come across an organization where they had invested in almost a database or library of stuff that they've done or not done, but constantly go back to question, rather than a focus on creating new stuff all the time? Have you ever experienced that?
I haven't run across it with them going back to it consistently. I
Okay.
think that's an interesting concept. I have run across it a lot of them creating it, or, this continual, how do we build, this information set of ideas, and, people are just constantly trying to put them out there, but there's not enough discipline and prioritization around it. But you have an interesting idea of also something that we go back to see if it's a better time now. It was more the context that it didn't fit back then.
Yeah, and I just was talking to somebody about Chat GPT a
Yeah.
couple of days ago. And so just taking that idea a step further, you can imagine, with our ability to mine the information in such detail now, that is far more possible than it would have been, say, 5 years ago, where it would have been a laborious task to have like all of this stuff and to be able to dive into it in some way. Whereas now with AI, you would, I think, probably be able to create the parameters and ask it to search the stuff that you've got in order to give you a short list at least. Mm.
Yeah, I mean, I've always believed that something like that is what the future will be in the culture space, that there'll be, some AI driven way of understanding more about culture. But if that's not combined with a very disciplined kind of qualitative approach to actually talk to people and actually so not just a survey, or not just AI, or not some data driven approach where we're trying to pull levers then and make changes, but meshing that with a real strong qualitative approach to solve problems with people, that is where the culture field will go. Will that be 50 years from now or 5? I don't know, but it's been a long time coming with kind of the AI, text analysis, other things not really taking hold fully in the culture space. People still being connected to engagement and the last engagement survey.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's play with that a little bit more then, Tim. So if you were to dream of an AI-based innovation in the culture space,
Right.
what would that look like?
Well, that would produce things that often take surveys now
Okay.
and are very difficult for people to get at the information at scale and understand it. And a survey that's a point in time. And because we don't want to burden our team with too many surveys, let's do short pulses. So we're losing the clarity of where things are at, where norms might differ across teams, things like that. So AI has the potential for a continual flow of information on how individuals and teams are interacting, and what the behaviors at least are that might indicate what the norms are. So we can see these differences, and we can see bright spots where collaboration's happening more and inclusion's happening more. And it's an automatic kind of continual network analysis of, like, where are those groups that are lighting up and we're seeing XYZ, and where are those groups where we're not? Well, what are the differences? So much potential there in the future, but long road to create that. But I don't know if anyone's even trying. I'm sure they are, but are they with real strong knowledge about things like culture, what it is, how it evolves, how to understand it?
Yeah. So what do you think of this then? Imagine like a heat map,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is based on the stated values of the organization, And so what it would basically be doing is representing the decisions made and the behaviors displayed, connected explicitly to the values that they say they stand for. And so if it's, hot, that means that there's a lot of excellence going on. And if it's tiny, it means there's no correlation between the way things are around here and the value on the wall. That would be very cool.
Right. Well, we get there now, but again, it's a snapshot, and it takes a lot of effort and energy to get there. But that snapshot's just fine, quite honestly, right now, because it is culture, and it's not changing at that fast of a rate. So very few are even doing the disciplined one-time thing on culture because of engagement. So this future of continually understanding those gaps and what's changing and what's evolving is way out there.
Yeah, and I suppose I agree with what you're saying, that culture moves pretty well. Actually, I'm just thinking of some organizations that I've been in where, say, there's a change of leadership style.
Exactly. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, and that can shift the culture really quickly. So I remember the guy that took over from me, I was running a golf and country club hotel, and the guy that followed me, he asked the golf buggies were supposed to be moved every night so that they weren't in the same place and the tires get damaged if they remain static. And so he marked the tires to know whether they had been moved or not, and then asked whether they had been moved and was told they had, and told them really smugly that he had marked them and he knew that they hadn't. And the impact that one single action had, which demonstrated his style, just went like a fire through the organization. It wasn't a healthy start. Okay, so to end a values jam and wrap it up, Tim, we always do it with the same question, and that is this. So what are you encouraged to do differently about innovation as a result of our conversation today?
Yeah, I mean, I think I haven't spent enough time, focusing on innovation and articulating more about like what we've discussed here that I think could be helpful and useful to others, and we could utilize in our work with organizations that need innovation. I mean, I think I always hit bits and pieces of these, but this conversation helped kind of build that out more, and your examples were great. So I appreciated kind of diving in and looking at this from all different angles.
Okay. And just to push you a little bit on that, what could be your first kind of step towards your general description of how you might think or do stuff differently with innovation? And it could be something really simple, but what could that first step look like?
I'm connecting back to a step that's already in motion a bit.
Okay.
Because we have a new website launching, some new blogs that really get at this, how culture changes, where I think I'm going to amp up the innovation language in there, because I think it will resonate as whether we're talking about innovation or customer experience or some of these other areas. When you really understand culture and the different dimensions of it, it can make solving those problems or making your organization more innovative or focused on customer experience or whatever it is better. So I'll build that into a couple of the blogs we're going to be putting out soon.
Okay, great. And for me, I think there are two strands of thought. One is something around paying more attention to innovation being an ongoing process rather than a one-hit delivery. And I'm thinking about the ValuesJam card deck, actually, because I had a conversation a couple of days ago about, what could card deck 2 look like? What might that be? And one of the ideas was that instead of questions on the back of the cards, we might have different definitions of the word on the front, because people interpret
Sure.
innovation in different ways. So it might be that we're going to create card decks whereby you're able to share all these different perspectives or definitions on the back in order to progress the conversation rather than questions. And then the other thing we touched on there specifically was, I can't wait to values jam with kids, because can you imagine what a 7 or 8-year-old would be saying to some of these questions? I think that would just be such a thrill, because they just, I don't know, well, I do know kids just see things much more clearly when they haven't got all of the kind of stuff and baggage that you acquire as you get older. So so that continuation piece is one. And then the other one, which is a little bit dangerous, is the one about failure kind of being okay and not being really failure.
Right.
But one of my core values is excellence. So I sometimes struggle with that, because I want to do things really, really well. But sometimes that means that I don't experiment enough. And so I'm just gonna pay more attention to that. So thanks very much for opening the world of innovation. I'm glad you chose that card.
I am too. I feel fortunate.
All right. Thanks again, Tim.
All right. Thanks, Alan. Take care.